I start with a voice on a headset that sounds like home. Vector 340, Angels 2-0, Buster. A two-year-old fighter director in a combat information center watches a green sweep on an air search radar and makes calm choices that save ships. He is not famous. He is trained, trusted, and fast. He is why Japanese pilots never found surprise. The scope blooms at a distance that feels unreal. Dots, bearings, speeds. He pushes a pair of F-6F Hellcats outward from the Essex-Class carrier on station. The pilots ride the climb like a roller coaster. They cannot see the enemy yet, but the radar can. It buys minutes. Minutes become miles. Miles become safety. Up top, the deck gang works like a factory floor. Bomb carts rattle. Ordnancemen lock fuses with quick hands. Plane captains slap cowls, yank chocks, and send machines down the deck in a rhythm that repeats all day. The Navy turned flight decks into assembly lines at sea. That is the American difference. We make process. We scale it. On the radio, Tokyo Rose says our carriers are gone. All of Admiral Mitch's carriers have been sunk tonight instantly. Boys laugh. The launch continues. Admiral William F. Halsey sits in his battle plot and writes a message. Admiral Chester Nimitz reads it to America with a grin. All Third Fleet ships reported sunk by Radio Tokyo have been salvaged and are retiring in the direction of the enemy. That line is steel wrapped in humor. It tells you what kind of country fights this war. Here is the part that makes jaws drop. In the Formosa air battles just before Leyte, Japan lost about 650 planes in the air and on the ground. The Third Fleet lost 89, 76 in combat, 13 in operations. That is not luck. That is radar finding raids far out, veteran pilots climbing to the right altitude, and a logistics river that never ran dry. The CIC is a small world with big power. It is grease pencil circles on a plot. It is a talker repeating bearing and range until the numbers live in the pilot's head. It is a kid from Kansas or Ohio turning electrons into time and time into life. He is America in a room with no windows. In Tokyo, Admiral Somu Toyoda studies a wall map and orders Sho to conquer. He believes a trap will break our rhythm, but he also admits a hard truth after the war. If the Philippines are lost, fuel is lost. Ammunition is lost. The fleet has no reason to live. That is what our young director cannot see from his dark room, but he is part of it. Every early intercept is one step closer to that result. On the carrier bridge, the captain watches contrails bloom where the director said they would. Far ahead, the Hellcats fall in from above. The first Japanese pilot sees tiny dots, then crosses, then tracers. He came hunting surprise. He meets a system, fighters, radar, radios, oilers, a mass of ships that do not sleep. He ejects a flare to rally his group. It does not matter. The interceptors are already in the right place. We zoom out. Task Force 38 spreads in groups like 4 storms. Carriers, fast battleships, light cruisers, destroyers by the score. Each group has its own cap. Each cap talks to its own CIC. The whole thing overlaps into a shield you cannot punch through without bleeding out. This is what America builds when it decides to win. Back on the mess deck, a kid reads a leaflet that floated down over Peleliu. It claims we have lost 19 carriers, 4 battleships, 10 cruisers. He folds it into a paper airplane and sends it down the table. The joke is not cruel, it is confident, because he has watched the deck make another strike. He has watched planes return and launch again. He knows a lie when he feels the thump of a catapult under his feet. At sunset, the director logs off and rubs his eyes. He is tired. He is proud. He heard pilots say tally at the exact bearing he called. He heard them call Splash 1 again and again. He hears the ship settling into night, routine, and knows the scope will spin until dawn. Somewhere out there, more raids are forming. Somewhere on our decks, more fighters are already being pushed to the line. We can name the steel: Intrepid, Cabot, Independence, Essex, Lexington, Langley, Enterprise, Franklin, San Jacinto, Belleau Wood. 6 fast battleships run shotgun. Iowa, New Jersey, Massachusetts, South Dakota, Washington, Alabama. Light cruisers, Biloxi, Vincennes, Miami, Santa Fe, Mobile, Reno, New Orleans, Wichita. 42 destroyers with teeth. Say the names out loud and you can hear the wake roaring. It had to stack up as an American victory, because the lineup is not a boast. It is an inventory, not a poem, and it tells the truth of capacity and will. Remember this when you hear the enemy's claims. Our answer is not a speech, it is a process. It is a green sweep on a scope, a pencil on a plot, and a fighter that arrives first. That is the hook of our story and the heart of our pride. We end with the headset voice again, steady as a heartbeat, calling a new vector into the dark. The ship hums, the ocean breathes. America keeps watch at 100 miles and then some. The next raid will come. We will already be there to meet it. A float plane drops paper rain over U.S. sailors near Peleliu. The leaflets brag that 19 American carriers are sunk, 4 battleships lost, and that 1,261 aircraft are at the bottom. A radio man picks one up, smooths the creases, and smiles. He can still hear the catapults thump. He can still smell avgas. He knows the truth is airborne. For 3 days and nights, Radio Tokyo fills the air with claims. Admiral Halsey's Third Fleet keeps radio silence and keeps fighting. The real numbers come from deck logs and after-action reports, not from a microphone. Off Formosa, Japan loses about 650 airplanes. The Third Fleet loses 8976 in combat, 13 to operations. Those figures are not chest-thumping, they are accounting. They explain why our pilots keep winning. Why is the mismatch so large? Air search radar paints raids far out. Fighter direction pulls cap to altitude and position. Pilots climb early and arrive with energy. The first pass breaks formations. The second pass scatters stragglers. Undertrained enemy crews fly hard but bleed strength each hour. We do not waste minutes. We turn minutes into angles into kills. A Marine brings Halsey's message to the radio shack. Minutes later, Admiral Chester Nimitz reads it to the nation with a grin that you can hear. All Third Fleet ships reported sunk by Radio Tokyo have been salvaged and are retiring in the direction of the enemy. It is a joke. It is also a war plan. It says the fleet will always be moving toward contact, no matter what the radio says. On the hangar deck, plane captains paint another kill mark on a Hellcat and then wipe oil from the cowling. They are not impressed by rumors. They are impressed by routines done right for the 1000th time. Bombs are fused, drop tanks mounted, guns harmonized. There is no drama, there is only speed. That is how you crush an enemy air arm in days. In Tokyo, Emperor Hirohito orders mass celebrations for the glorious victory of Taiwan. General Headquarters even issues a statement that no American invasion of the Philippines is expected. That same night, the tone changes. It is time for a radical modification of Operations Show Go. The propaganda hits a wall called reality. You can call it morale. We call it radar, training, and fuel. What does the enemy see? A group leader looks back over his wing and counts gaps where wingmen should be. He sees white wakes in the sky where tracers stitched through and where airplanes fell. He expected to find carriers lit by morning sun and unready. Instead, he met interceptors right on time, rolling in from height and speed. He sees discipline in motion. He knows he has run into a machine that never stops. American sailors save the leaflet. They tape it to a ready-room chalkboard. They do not need to argue with it. They fly another strike. They land. They rearm. They launch again. The best argument is the sound of props thundering and the sight of a deck crew doing its job faster than yesterday. That is what makes a lie feel small. Here is a number that feels like fiction until you see it in ink. 2 cruisers, Canberra and Houston, are wounded and towed out after the Formosa fight. Everything else, every carrier, every battleship, every fast ship remains in action. The Japanese commander later calls the battle catastrophic for his empire. He is right. It was catastrophic because our system works and keeps working while his burns out. We talk a lot about courage, and we should. But courage without structure is waste. The Essex-Class carriers brought structure. They brought CICs that fused voices and plots. They brought deck gangs that could turn a strike in minutes. They brought oilers that fed them at sea. They brought a habit. Finish the mission, then do it again. Night comes and the fleet runs darkened. Below, the CIC watches the scope. Above, the stars wheel. The men who make the magic are tired but alert. The enemy will try again. He always does. That is fine. We will be waiting with numbers that are real and with fighters that arrive first. A pilot in a ready room writes 4 words under the leaflet. Tell Tokyo I'm busy. He is not being cruel. He is being exact. He has a launch time. He has a target. He has a vector. This is what victory feels like from the inside. Schedules that beat speeches. There is another truth under the noise. Training pipelines on our side are deep and wide. Replacement pilots arrive with hours in type. Gunnery is practiced. Landing signals are drilled until the paddles feel like second nature. Maintenance crews swap engines in hours, not days. Spare parts ride the oilers and the ammo ships. The line never runs out, so the score climbs, not because the enemy is cowardly, but because America built a ladder high enough to keep climbing while others slipped. The pilots see this in their fuel states and ammo counts. The chiefs see it in spare plugs and tires. The admirals see it in options on the chart. It all points in one direction. Forward, toward the enemy, again and again. We close with one more image that feels like a verdict. A kid from Nebraska walks across a quiet hangar at midnight and runs his hand along a Hellcat's wing. The metal is warm. The deck is humming. He knows the morning will bring raids and rumors. He also knows the scoreboard will be written in the sky, not on a microphone. A clerk pins a new operations map on the bulkhead. Arrows curl north, west, and through a narrow strait. Someone whistles. The plan is bold and strange. In Tokyo, Admiral Somu Toyoda has already given it a name: Show to Conquer. The hook is simple: bait the Americans with carriers and smash their troops at Leyte with battleships. Here is the problem the enemy hopes we cannot solve. If Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa dangles carriers to the north, can he pull our fast carriers away from the beachhead long enough for Kurita's heavy guns to break through? It sounds clever. It admits a deeper truth. Ozawa's own post-war words cut to the bone. A decoy. That was our first primary mission. The main mission was all sacrifice. The carriers are threadbare. Many pilots could not even safely land on a flight deck. That is not strategy. That is a confession made of steel and shortages. And it matters because it shows the gap between plan and power. The Americans know 2 things that decide the answer. First, radar and scouts can find a decoy force before dawn and hold it on plots all day. Second, even if a task group chases north, the machine keeps running. Other groups launch cap. Oilers feed the screens. Escort carriers keep planes over the troops. The decoy cannot outfly a system that overlaps and multiplies coverage. Toyoda's map room tells the other half of the truth. He later explains why the plan had to be tried. If the Philippines are lost, the shipping lanes to oil are cut. The fleet cannot be fueled. It cannot be armed. There is no sense in saving the fleet at the expense of the loss of the Philippines. This is a leader staring at a wall and choosing sacrifice. It is also a picture of an enemy whose choices have narrowed because American power has grown. On our side, Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher calls the roll of ships that give options: Intrepide, Cabo, Independence, Essex, Lexington, Longley, Enterprise, Franklin, San Jacinto, Belleau Wood. 6 fast battleships: Iowa, New Jersey, Massachusetts, South Dakota, Washington, Alabama run with them. Light cruisers and 42 destroyers fill the screen. A force like this can split, strike, and still keep a shield over the transports. It is not fragile, it is elastic. Picture the night before the lunge. Radar snoopers prowl ahead and whisper bearings into the net. In the morning, the carriers work a plan built on those whispers. Fighters launch into stacked altitudes. Bombers arm for deck parks and fuel fires. The timing is not accidental. It is engineered. That is how you answer a decoy. Make sure the dawn finds him, not the other way around. What do the men on the enemy decks feel? A petty officer on Zuikaku watches a pilot he trained wobble on approach and wave off twice. Another pilot slams in and smashes a wheel. The air group is a patchwork. The fuel is thin. The plan asks for sacrifice and gets it. But sacrifice cannot fix training. It cannot fix numbers. It cannot fix radar that sees, and a doctrine that uses what it sees. There is also humility in our side of the story. No commander likes being lured. No sailor likes the idea that the enemy is shaping the fight. The answer is not pride. The answer is performance. The groups that do not chase still hold their cap lines. The screens still smoke and shoot. The escort carriers still fly planes to the beach. The machine absorbs the feint and keeps working. By noon, American pilots speak in flat voices about targets that fill the sea. Deck parks, island-size wakes. They roll in, climb out, and roll in again. The decoy is doing its job. But our job is better. Hit, rearm, hit again. One pilot writes in his book, "They looked big until the runs started. Then they looked slow." He is not bragging. He is measuring. A boatswain's mate climbs a ladder at dawn and stops cold. The horizon is full of masts and islands of grey steel. Carriers sit like factories. Battleships pace them like bodyguards. Destroyers write white arcs around all of it. He laughs once under his breath. Holy smoke, we brought the whole country. In all, 738 vessels are organized for this operation. 3rd Fleet, 7th Fleet, Admiral William F. Halsey, Admiral Thomas C. Kincaid, Vice Admiral Mark A. Mitcher's task force, 38, broken into 4 task groups. McCain, Bogan, Sherman, Davison. This is not a number pulled from the air. It is a floating city built by a nation that learned to make cars by the millions and then learned to make carriers the same way. The orders from Admiral Chester Nimitz are simple to say and hard to do. Cover and support the Southwest Pacific. Destroy enemy naval and air forces that threaten the Philippines. Protect the long road of sea and sky that runs from America to the fight. If a chance comes to crush a major part of the enemy fleet, take it. Those orders show trust. They also show speed. Halsey is told to do it fast, and he does. Look at the names and you can feel the wake. Intrepide, Cabot, Independence, Essex, Lexington, Langley, Enterprise, Franklin, San Jacinto, Belleau Wood. 6 fast battleships, Iowa, New Jersey, Massachusetts, South Dakota, Washington, Alabama, ride with them. Light cruisers Biloxi, Vincennes, Miami, Santa Fe, Mobile, Reno, New Orleans, Wichita. 42 destroyers, each one with a crew that knows its job, each one part of a design that overlaps and repeats. This is the muscle behind the calm voice on the circuit, the strength under every vector and bearing. Now see the secret weapon no one cheers for on parade. Oilers. We had orders to get to Ulithi as fast as we could. We fueled them quickly, an Esso captain recalls. The sea train never stops. Millions of barrels of oil, tanker after tanker, run into the teeth of weather and threat to put hoses over and keep the war moving. Navy oilers and ammo ships, AEs and AKEs bring guns, shells, avgas, lube, and the boring, beautiful things that win wars, clothing, food, spares. It is the most American thing of all, taking a dull, difficult job and making it relentless, reliable, and fast. This scale means choices. 3rd Fleet can strike north or east and still keep a shield over Leyte. 7th Fleet can load its guns for Surigao and hold the Nightside Gate. Army planners admit the troops ashore carry only a few days of supplies. Interruption, even briefly, can hurt. That is what the enemy's plan aims at. Steal time. Our answer is an armada that denies time to the other side. There is a human heartbeat under the numbers. A tanker bosun smells raw fuel and hears the clank of manifold dogs at night. He knows his cargo is the difference between a cap that launches and a cap that waits. He never sees the dogfights he enables. He does not need to. When a destroyer slides alongside and takes on gas at sea, he feels pride, because he just put fighters back in the sky. The enemy looks at this and sees a problem without a clean answer. Ozawa's carriers are denuded of most of their air crews, sent north to act as bait. Kurita's heavy guns will try to punch through at the right moment, but the plan requires a gap to open. The Americans do not leave many gaps. With 4 task groups moving like a weather system and oilers close enough to feed them, the window keeps closing. Bad weather hits on October 24. Japanese strikes go up as planned, but do little damage. Reports from the other side admit it. A heavy 250 plane raid hurts 2 cruisers and 3 destroyers. 14 Zeros sent to cover Kurita are driven back by the very ships they escort. Against that uncovered column, American carrier planes pour in and land hits until battleships are struck by mid-afternoon. They never do. The Armada also holds a balance between rules and audacity. Halsey once said, "We violate them every day. Whatever we do fast." The quote fits the decks under him. Launch cycles snap. Replenishment rigs whistle. Scouts climb at night to mark where dawn must strike. Our strength is not only steel, it is tempo. It is the ability to move, hit, refuel, and hit again before the other side can reset. Stand on a carrier catwalk, and you can feel what 738 ships mean. The air smells like hot oil and salt. The sea is crisscrossed with wakes. Signals slam up and down halyards. A destroyer officer of the deck calls, "Vessel on the port bow." A bosun's pipe trills. Somewhere in that vast order, a single 2-year-old fighter director points at a scope and says, "Launch." The scale serves the person. The person makes use of the scale. A twin-engine Night Scout lifts off USS Independence and disappears into black. The crew calls their radar owl eyes. They hunt with electrons. At 2:05 a.m. on the 25th of October 1944, the scope shows 5 ships only 80 miles to the north of Task Force 38. Minutes later, a second group appears 40 miles astern. The night finally gives up its secrets. This is the trick that makes dawn lethal. Radar scouts hold contact. They whisper bearings into the net. Fighter directors mark grease pencil tracks. Carriers slide on new courses without a whistle. Pilots in sloppy ready rooms pull on Mae Wests and grin at the timing. They have not had a full-scale carrier battle since the Philippine Sea. They have been waiting for a target-rich morning. The B.O.Zombies. Compositions tell you why confidence rides high. Ozawa's force brings Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, Chiyoda, with hybrid carriers Hyuga and Ise, light cruisers Oyodo, Tama, Isuzu, and 9 destroyers round it out. Against that stand, 10 American carriers, Intrepid, Cabot, Independence, Essex, Lexington, Langley, Enterprise, Franklin, San Jacinto, Belleau Wood backed by 6 fast battleships and 42 destroyers. It has to stack up as an American victory. The numbers don't brag, they predict. But the most important number at night is time. Night scouts buy it. They let admirals and air bosses move chess pieces before the sky lightens. 20 minutes after the snoopers report, Halsey deploys his carrier groups. Bogan and Davison head north at speed to join Sherman. Mitcher positions for the most effective daylight strikes. The regrouping runs 2 hours late, but it does not matter. The machine is already turning toward the kill. In the dark CICs, teenagers with headsets fight drowsiness and stare at scopes. They trace the enemy's drift and hold it for all hands. One says quietly, "Mark, range 8 to 0. Another repeats bearings into the long chain of men who will make those numbers into force. Up on deck, a plane captain checks a tire by touch alone. He feels the rubber, nods, and steps aside. The pilot raises a thumb. The catapult officer chops his hand. The jet of steam hisses. The system acts as one. It is the opposite on the enemy side. Ozawa has courage but little training left. His carriers are denuded of most of their air crews. Some flyers cannot even land safely. He has to be a decoy. He does his duty and holds north. It is brave. It is also a sentence. Dawn will not be kind. Bad weather still swirls in patches. Engines cough. One snooper asks to give up the search from engine trouble and is recalled. The tension spikes. Pilots hate waiting when a target is near. Would Ozawa turn tail and give them the slip too? A line officer asks. The answer rides on the work done in the small hours, the tracks, the vectors, the fuel plans, the deck cycles that Dawn will turn into dives and flames. There is a man on a picket destroyer who makes the night feel simple. He stares into black and tastes salt on his lips. He hears the sea and his ship's own heart. He trusts the net. He knows someone out there has the picture. He knows his job is to float, to guard, to shoot if a ghost turns real. On the other side, a Japanese lookout on Zuikaku scans for silhouettes. He finds none. He does not know that he has already been seen. Halsey's pace fits the picture. We violate the rules every day. Whatever we do fast, he once said. The line could be stamped on every watch bill tonight. The carriers angle to be within strike range at first light. The battleships pace them like wolves under a moon. The destroyers make sure no submarine steals in. All of it flows around the invisible eyes that started it, the snoopers who handed the fleet the gift of time. You can draw a straight line from that night contact to the morning's violence. Deck parks explode. Island bridges burn. Hits mount so fast that enemy radio calls sound like a drum roll. Battleships and carriers are struck in quick order. The decoy pays out. The pilots who strap in at dawn know the bearings are real, and the targets are where the plots said they would be. They trust the plots and the people who made them. In the ready room, the chalkboard is simple. Time on deck, fuel, altitude, call signs. A pilot with grease on his cuffs writes, "Check right magneto rough at climb." Someone tapes a captured leaflet to the door, then rips it down so no one jinxes the morning. They carry the quiet energy for hard work done right. Below, oiler crews wake into their own night. Hoses thump. Valves groan. Avgas flows into the bellies of planes that will launch at first light. Across the water, a Japanese operations officer flips through pilot rosters, sees gaps. Names are penciled in where veterans used to be. He draws arrows on a plot he cannot keep current because his scouts cannot find what American radar can. He does his duty. He feels the weight of it. He has no tool to stop the morning that is already coming. The sun will rise quick and hard. Engines will howl. The first strike will feel like a door blowing open. Men who worked in the dark will listen on the net and hear their midnight bearings turn into daylight victories. That is how America makes night fight for us, by seeing first and moving faster. A destroyer helmsman feels the deck shudder as his captain orders flank speed toward battleship flashes. The plan says screen and smoke. The heart says charge. USS Hole rips into a turn and lines up her torpedoes. Her gunners are already hot. They know what stands ahead. Battleships and heavy cruisers with 14-inch teeth. The problem is brutal and simple. What do you do when big guns appear at close range and your escorts are all you have? You buy time. You make the enemy aim at you. Howell launches 5 torpedoes at high speed and readies to reload. Then a Congo shell hammers her and knocks out the port engine. Another shell follows. Steering goes next. The ship fights on anyway. Hand does everything, including steering. The crew fires the rest of the spread by hand. By 0900 Howell gurgles under the Samar Sea. She has taken more than 40 hits, including 14 inches. Her 2 remaining guns have fired about 300 rounds each. Survivors slide into oil and water with burned hands and bleeding faces. They do not regret the charge. They know the carriers behind them are still alive because they made the enemy look their way. Johnston goes down fighting too. Her turrets are out except 3 and 5. but the gun crews keep banging out salvos by hand until she rolls and sinks. Heermann keeps clawing at life and throws herself in again and again. On Callanine Bay and Gambia Bay, the men see the destroyer's smoke and the splashes that should have been theirs. They watch cruisers to the northeast pour fire at them and praise the inaccurate, not very fast pattern that lets them dodge. Smoke, guts, and American habit upset a perfect ambush. The neat geometry of range and armor turns into chaos when little ships bite big ones. The water heaves with splashes and wakes. Signalmen wave flags through smoke to keep formations from crossing each other's fire. Men on the flight deck pray and push aircraft toward launch as if shoving life itself. A carrier captain speaks of the enemy's main body 10 miles north, cruisers 15,000 yards northeast, and the wind exposing his flank. His tone is clinical with terror under it. He knows his escort carriers, his jeep carriers, are not built to take this. He knows destroyer attacks momentarily, at least suppress battleship fire. Moments turn into minutes, minutes into miles. The calculus of courage buys time. We should talk about why this could happen. It is not only radar and process, it is character. American commanders trained men to act without waiting. They taught crews to fire by hand when power died. They trusted skippers to make ugly choices. That is not swagger. It is discipline under fire. You can trace it from boot camp through every drill and watch Bill to this exact morning. The enemy is not weak. Kurita's center force is strong and angry. But surprise cuts both ways. He expected quarry. He got hunters. He sees destroyers running at him through shell splashes and smoke. He loses minutes to confusion, smoke, and torpedo tracks. He pays for those minutes with position and nerve. By the time his force regains order, the little carriers are farther away, and more American planes are already coming back. On one of those carriers, a pilot hears the call for close support and launches into dark cloud and rain squalls with whatever bombs or torpedoes he can carry. He dives on heavy ships with weapons not meant for armor and still makes them turn. He buys another minute for the men in the water and for the carriers trying to live. He lands, takes gas and ordnance, and launches again. Factories at sea, even in panic, still run. Say the names: Howell, Johnston, Heermann, Gambia Bay, Callanine Bay. Reports read like a mechanic's log ranges, bearings, gun counts, hits. That is why they convince. The enemy's shock is honest and human. A cruiser gunnery officer watches torpedo wakes cross where battle wagons used to be, and cannot believe anyone would run in like that. A battleship captain who expects to harvest carriers learns that small ships can change a morning. A plan that looked perfect on a map meets Americans who do not care about perfection. They care about the next minute. The chapter closes with the sea going quiet in patches, while smoke drifts and sailors float in kapok vests. Above them, the sound of aircraft grows again. The carriers are alive. The enemy has lost time. The calculus holds. When technology blinks, American guts keep the picture whole. A plane captain slaps the hot cowl of an F-6, F-5 Hellcat and shouts, "You're good!" The Pratt and Whitney are. 2,800 coughs. Then steadies into a deep drumbeat that makes deck plates tremble. Brown shirt ordnancemen roll 500-pounders. Yellow shirts windmill arms. White-hatted corpsmen stand ready because danger is a habit here. Launch, recover, turn. Launch again. It looks like a war. It feels like a factory. The Essex-Class carrier turns steel into sorties with the rhythm of Detroit on its best day. The hook is simple. Do simple things fast. The same way every time, even when the deck heaves and wind claws at your face. The Hellcats, 6.50 caliber Brownings are harmonized at 200 yards. Drop tanks are safety for range. You punch them off. The moment a fighter director says, "Buster." That director sits below in a dark combat information center, tracking blips from SK air search radar out, past 100 miles. He gives you altitude, bearing, and speed. You arrive high, fast, hungry. That is our edge. We make seconds into a plan. The revelation lives in math that smells like avgas. Launch spacing tightens to the heartbeat of the ship. 90 seconds is the goal between cats when the sea cooperates. Deck crews mark turns in chalk and oil. A blue jacket palms a loose screw caught in a scupper and pockets it, saving a tire and maybe a life. On the fantail, a bosun's pipe trills as the ship answers, rudder to hold wind over the bows. Above it all, a quiet voice on the net says, Vector 340, Angels 2-0, because SK has already painted a raid you cannot see. The question, whispered by men who remember early war chaos, is brutal. Can you keep this tempo when darkness, rain squalls, and enemy raids stack on each other? The answer comes when the deck boss shouts, clear, and another F6F claws sky with confidence. America's miracle is not romance, it's repetition. The human element has a name and grease on his hands. AMM-1C Joe Ramirez of San Antonio carries a spark plug tray like a priest carries a chalice. He times himself on swaps. He knows which birds run rough on climb and which need a loving whack where the cowling sags. He sleeps with cotton in his ears because the R2000 800 hum never leaves your skull. He has a pocket notebook full of serial numbers and little drawings of scuffed wheel hubs. He cannot see the blips at 100 miles, but he knows his work turns those blips into smoke on the horizon. He pins a folded photo of a newborn behind a rib in the hangar, then forgets it for 12 hours because work owns the clock. The enemy's shock begins before the fight. Pilots briefing on Zuikaku look at rosters and see empty lines where veterans stood. They talk about courage and duty. They do not talk about maintenance depth or spare engines on call at sea. They cannot. Their carriers sail as decoys because training pipelines and fuel are spent. They expect Americans to be brave. They do not expect Americans to be this organized. A raid leader rolls out of cloud and finds interceptors stacked above and ahead, sliding in with speed to spare. He catches only a flash of markings and the glitter of gun ports. He thinks the interceptors guessed right. He never realizes the interceptors were placed. Bridge to bridge, the payoff is a number that sounds like a fairy tale jammed into a logbook. Off Formosa, Japan loses roughly 650 aircraft to the Third Fleet's 89 inches the air and on the ground. That ratio lives in the muscle memory on flight decks. Hellcats roll off cats already briefed to altitude. Avengers thump to the bow with fuses double-checked and torpedoes safetied for the climb. A black shoe sailor with a clipboard ticks boxes no one cheering will ever see. Up in CIC, a junior officer turns a bearing board with a grease-filled thumb so the fighter director's words stay married to the deck officer's wind calls. Down in the engineering spaces, black gang stokers feed boilers with a tempo that maps exactly to the launch cycle. This is the orchestra. This is the score. Holy shit moments grow from details. The Hellcat is a 12,000-pound anvil that turns energy into authority. It dives clean, claws back altitude, and forgives a landing that would kill a lesser fighter. It is not elegant. It is inevitable. Across the ocean, back home, Willow Run builds B-24 seconds at a rate so fast that a bomber rolls out every 63 minutes, a factory cadence that seeps into the Navy by osmosis. Build routines, then run them faster. On the hangar deck, a chief lines up his crew and calls for a race whose team can turn a plane first without a single mistake. They write times on a chalkboard like box scores. War becomes a scoreboard because a scoreboard keeps you honest. The enemy feels the futility in tiny ways. A Japanese wingman looks down at a sea flecked with wakes that never stop circling. He sees anti-aircraft mounts swing to meet him before he slips through overcast. He tastes burnt cordite and oil when tracers nick his canopy brace. He watches a friend cartwheel into grey water and turns without orders because the sky is suddenly empty, except for dots that keep appearing where he wants none. He does not know that a teenager in a windowless room made the decision 2 minutes ago that landed him in this exact patch of sky with this exact set of problems. Bridge into the next fight with a single image. A deck gang rolling a fresh tire past a parked aircraft whose guns still tick as they cool, the metal singing in the salt air. A talker repeats a bearing he could, by now, recite in his sleep. The cat boss holds up a hand, steady as a metronome, and the ship leans into the wind as if it too is impatient. You want to know how we won? We never stopped the line. We never left the station. We made the Pacific ring with routine, and routine wins wars. A young yeoman in Mitch's flag plot sharpens a pencil and looks over a board that is bigger than his bunkroom. Coloured pins mark 4 carrier task groups fanned out like a weather front: Bogan, Sherman, McCain, Davison. Each has its own combat information centre, its own radar pickets, its own fighter direction net. A staffer whispers, 4 fists, 1 punch. He isn't wrong. Battleships Iowa, New Jersey, Massachusetts, South Dakota, Washington, and Alabama lope alongside like armoured wolves. Destroyers ride the white-capped edges, hungry to close. The revelation that stuns even veterans is not just steel count, it's orchestration. Each task group can fight alone. Together they create overlap, so thick the enemy cannot find a seam. SK air search radar gives range at 100 miles. SG surface radar keeps screens honest in rain and night. A pilot sees only a strip of deck and a swath of sky. Mitch's team sees everything. The question scribbled in the margins of plans since Midway, what if multiple carrier groups act as a single mind, gets answered by bearings passed across circuits that hum like a living thing. The problem is no longer finding the enemy. It's how fast you can convert a contact into a kill. The human element is a pilot with tired eyes and a grin that never leaves. Commander David McCampbell, CAG on USS Essex, walks into the ready room on 24 October 1944 and checks a board that looks too full to be real. He straps in and leads VF-15 up. Over Luzon that morning, he shoots down 9 enemy aircraft in one mission, becoming the top Navy ace. He flies a Hellcat like a blacksmith swings a hammer heavy, sure, and exactly where it needs to land. His wingman brings home a miracle too. When McCampbell lands, deck crews meet him with a thumbs up, then roll his bird away because the line must keep moving. Heroes are fuel here, not finish lines. The enemy's shock has proper nouns. On 25 October off Cape Engano, Japanese carriers Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda die under coordinated strikes from TF-38. Zuikaku, last survivor of Pearl Harbor's striking force, sinks with flags flying. A light cruiser will not see sunset. Destroyers dart, rescue, burn. From above, the 4 carriers look like bright squares, turning darker with each pass as fires eat paint and then flesh. The decoy mission ends in smoke and churning wakes. Japanese radio calls become fragments, then silence. Everyone on our side hoomps the plot board with a flat palm once, a sailor's salute to a heavy page turning. The hammer works because the handle is long and strong. Logistics ships, oilers, ammunition ships, provision carriers slip up in formation and deliver moving resupply. Avgas hoses snake over, rations flow, spark plugs and tires refill lockers that were empty before morning watch. Replenishment at sea keeps the groups at fighting speed where other navies must leave the stage. A destroyer officer watches lines part, wipes salt sting from his eyes, and realizes the miracle he just witnessed is not drama. It's policy. It's the American way of war. Never leave the fight if you can help it. Numbers cut through smoke. 10 American carriers deploy at once in TF-38. 6 fast battleships provide anti-aircraft umbrellas that spit metal into sky at angles that only practice can create. 40-plus destroyers carve picket lines that talk as well as they shoot. Without the talking, guns find only where the enemy was. With SK and fighter direction, guns point where the enemy will be. The difference looks like clairvoyance in the gun cameras. It isn't. It's calculus done by farm kids and machinists in dim rooms who learn to trust their boards. A moment on the flag bridge sells the whole idea. Mitcher listens to overlapping controllers feed their fighters. Angels 2-2, steer 350. Tally 1 o'clock high. He nods once and asks fuel states for each group. The answers come crisp. He shifts launch windows by minutes, not hours, to fold 4 fist punches into one continuous blow. A staff officer breathes. "We've got him." An older bosun behind him, who has seen too many hurricanes, mutters, "Aye." The enemy stares at wakes that never end and decides the sea itself is against him. A Japanese officer who once believed in decisive battle watches smoke curl from his carrier's island and thinks of training fields that went silent when fuel ran out. He hears the clang of fire doors, the cough of pumps, the wild hope that a damage control party can catch up. He turns to the horizon and sees American planes already coming back for a second pass. He knows in that instant that courage cannot bridge arithmetic. Bridge forward with an image as clean as a blueprint. 4 American task groups moving on jagged tracks that fit together like gears. A battleship captain checks his range tables and smiles because no one will get through to his carriers today. A destroyer skipper runs down bearing lines, angry to be late to the fun. In CIC, a fighter director drinks cold coffee, recalibrates his board, and tells 2 more Hellcats to chase a fading blip because even ghosts deserve a last look. TF-38 doesn't just hit hard, it hits again while the first blow still echoes. This is the hammer. This is how you break an enemy fleet without breaking stride. A leaflet flutters down and catches on a signal halyard. A seaman plucks it free and reads that 19 American carriers have sunk, 4 battleships are gone, and more than 1,000 aircraft have vanished under the waves. He laughs. He can hear guns bark at a drone tug just off the starboard beam as gunners practice again. He can feel the deck tilt into the wind for yet another launch. He pins the leaflet to the ready room corkboard with a note. Return to sender. The revelation comes out of ledgers, not loudspeakers. In the Formosa battles just before Leyte, Japan loses around 650 aircraft. The Third Fleet loses 89, 76 in combat, and 13 in operational mishaps. 2 American cruisers, Canberra and Houston, take wounds and are towed away, but the carriers, battleships, and fast screens stay on station. Air groups count rounds by thousands and sorties by the hour. The whispered question inside CIC is cold. If Tokyo microphones can conjure sunken fleets, can they also conjure trained pilots, spare engines and fuel? The answer writes itself when dawn shows deck parks lined with aircraft ready to go, and enemy rosters show blank spaces where experience used to live. The human element wears headphones and a smile you can hear. A fighter pilot with his name chalked on a Hellcat looks at a photo of his wife tucked under the lip of a panel and says, "Tell Tokyo I'm busy." He has new spark plugs, topped guns, a full bag, and a controller who has him perching right where trouble wants to be. When he lands, a green-shirt crewman catches his wire with a flourish like a baseball shortstop turning 2. They wave, hit him forward, pull chocks, and shove the next bird toward the cat. He doesn't keep souvenirs like leaflets. He keeps a schedule. The enemy's shock is simple and human. A Japanese raid commander rolling in at the head of a formation expects confusion and slow-to-rise patrols. He meets Cap already at altitude, crossing his path with speed to spare. He turns to egress and discovers more fighters sliding down in a second layer. He dives to wave-top level and streaks for cloud, only to find gunnery good and calm on the ships below. 5-inch divided by 38 seconds bark, Beaufort's chatter, Oerlikon's stitch, and the sky is suddenly a cage of white puffs. He feels small and far from help. He calls a heading and only a fraction of his men answer. Honesty lives in facts that feel like bragging until you read them twice. On 25 October 1944 off Cape Engano, Zuikaku, last of the Pearl Harbor strike force, goes under. Zuiho follows. Chiyoda and Chitose do not come home. A light cruiser dies in the chaos. Destroyers burn and then vanish. Truth does not shout. It bubbles up in oil slicks, in lists of missing men, in officers scribbling last signals to ships that will never reply. The radio cannot hide that smell. A gunner's mate on an Essex-Class watches Tracer's arc and thinks of a very different scoreboard, one with rivets and catalogue numbers. He knows where spare barrels sit. He knows how many rounds the ship fired yesterday and how many she is allotted to fire today. He checks locks with fingers that no longer tremble in blast. He grins at a new boy and says, "Breathe when it flashes. Don't fight the gun. Ride it." That tone, confident, generous, unscared, is American as a ball game on a summer night. We talk a lot about lies, but the deeper story is belief. Belief that training beats a slogan. Belief that oil and parts arriving on time matter more than cheers on a radio. Belief that a two-year-old in a dark room with a pencil can steer $500 million of steel and human. Courage with a single, calm sentence. The enemy does not lack courage. He lacks the scaffolding for courage to climb. He flies into a machine that eats sorties and grows stronger with every pass. The bridge to the next blow is a quiet inventory. 4 Japanese carriers down at Engano. Battleships in the Surigao Strait, broken by an American night gunnery trap. Heavy cruisers chewed up off Samar by planes that launched with whatever bombs they had left. Our losses hurt Street. Low gone in a sheet of fire after a suicide plane hit. Gambia Bay and little destroyers like Johnston and Howell lost in a fight that no bookie would take, but the ledger is still a landslide. The propaganda voice fades to a hiss you can barely hear over the engines warming on deck. The truth sits in rows of airplanes with fuel, fuses, and orders. The truth sits in chow lines that reach around a hangar full of spare parts. The truth sits in a captain's voice when he says, "Come right to 040, make your course good, launch when ready." You cannot argue with a formation lifting into a blue that you own. A signalman on Calinin Bay watches shell splashes straddle the stern and mutters, "We got 5 minutes." He doesn't know if it's a prayer or a bet. Rear Admiral Clifton A.F. Sprague, Ziggy to friends and Taffy 3 to history, stares at smoke and rain and orders the only thing that makes sense. Small boys attack. The escort carriers Gambia Bay, Calinin Bay, Fanshawe Bay, White Plains, Street Low, Kit Kun Bay are floating airfields, not armoured brawlers. Their guns are thin, their hearts are not. The sea boils with their desperation. The revelation isn't that Americans are brave, it's that our system makes courage count. When the radar picture blurs and big guns appear without warning, doctrine snaps into something older and fiercer. Destroyers Johnston, Howell, and Heermann spit smoke and run straight into a storm of 14-inch and 8-inch fire. They launch torpedoes in cold arcs that cut geometry in half. Bomb and torpedo planes from the CVEs take off with whatever they have, depth charges, general-purpose bombs, even nothing but guns, and dive on heavy ships to force them to turn. The problem, posed by a perfect ambush, becomes an arithmetic class with new numbers. Minutes bought, angles changed, ranges stretched. The human element has faces we can name. Commander Ernest E. Evans on USS Johnston had promised at commissioning, "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way." He keeps his word. Johnston loses power to turrets, then fires by hand. She coughs, smoke, and still charges. Fires, turns, charges again. Commander Amos T. Hathaway on Heermann throws his tin can at cruisers that outweigh him by thousands of tons and shrugs as if late to a dance. On Calinin Bay, deck crews push planes forward under shrapnel whisper and launch them into grey as if shoving hope itself. They don't wait for speeches. They have work. The enemy's shock slaps hard. Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita expects to crush escort carriers and harvest transports. He meets a knife fight he did not order. Smoke blinds his rangefinders. Torpedo wakes slice cool shapes across water that should have been his private highway. Heavy ships wheel away from imagined and real threats until formations fray. He looks for clean lines and finds chaos, for weakness and finds teeth. He senses the window closing 1 minute at a time and knows, as any professional knows, that a lost minute never returns. Moments become a chain you can hear and smell. Salty steam from ruptured lines. Cordite sting that makes eyes water. Screams of metal as a shell slams a thin hull. and steel answers with a groan from its bones. Planes dive, guns hammer, men cheer and gag in the same breath. In the black mess of it all, calculation survives. Every torpedo that makes a battleship turn buys 30 seconds. Every dive that forces a cruiser to throw its helm over throws off an entire battery's plot and gives a carrier one more cat shot. Courage is not random. It is currency when the bank is burning. A voice on an escort carrier bridge reports the main enemy body at 10 miles, cruisers 15,000 yards to the northeast, wind wrong for launch. The report is clipped, precise, humor hanging by a thread. Men dive bomb with 100-pound practice bombs because weight is weight and a hit is a hit. They rake heavy decks with 50 caliber fire, not because it will pierce armor, but because it will force a flinch. When they land, they take gas and anything with a fuse and go again. No one writes poetry. They write STBD oil 60%, and bombs gone, and wire 3, and it reads like an epic because it is. Losses rip like teeth. Johnston goes under. Howell follows. The destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts, the destroyer escort that fought like a battleship, burns her guns nearly white, then dies a hero. Gambia Bay sinks in a spout of steam and sorrow. Street. Lowe takes a suicide plane later and becomes a bright wound on the day. But the carriers live long enough to launch again and again. Kurita turns away at last, his mind a ledger of what he has and what he can no longer risk. The bridge to the next chapter is a quiet deck after the fight. Survivors bob in oily swells and look up at planes still droning toward the enemy. A boatswain's mate leans on a rail and lets his hands shake now that shaking is allowed. He stares into rain and thinks of something his chief said, "If you don't know what to do the brave thing." America teaches that and builds a machine that makes the brave thing count. 5 minutes to live turned into an hour, then a morning, then history. A night wind cuts across the Formosa Strait on 21, November 1944. A radar operator aboard USS Celian, SS-315, studies a smear that ought to be coastline and mutters, "Only trouble is, it's moving." Commander Eli T. Reich climbs the bridge, steps in pajamas and slippers, peers through salt-slick glasses, and sees a skyline that rolls with the sea. Not coastline, warships, big ones. A captain's pulse settles in that instant when nerves flick to math. Angle on the bow, target speed, firing solution. The revelation is that American reach does not stop at the waterline. Carrier air power hammers by day. Submarines like Celian prowl by night and finish jobs in the lanes where the enemy still believes itself safe. Reich lines up a shot that will go into the history books. In darkness, he launches, spreads at shadowed hulks. A dull thunder answers across black water. The massive battleship Congo, veteran of many fights, takes mortal wounds. The destroyer Urakaze dies in the same drama. One American submarine, running on diesel and nerve, erases a symbol of Japanese gunpowder in minutes. The Pacific is now a sea where even giants must whisper. The human element is the sonar man crouched over his set, counting heartbeats between torpedo launch and expected impact. He doesn't breathe right for those seconds. He hears the ocean's low moan and the submarine's metal sigh. Then the clock and his bones agree hit. He flinches at the violence he cannot see. He writes the time down with hands that don't quite obey. Later, he will say he felt the battleship die through the deck plates like an animal going still. The enemy's shock is deep and private. A Japanese officer who survived aerial assault, after aerial assault believes night and storm belong to him. He learns that American radar can find shape through weather, that American torpedoes run true, that American captains will take a small boat into a fight picked for big guns and still come away the last voice on the water. He tastes salt and smoke and knows the ocean itself has turned against him. He thinks of oil he cannot get, escorts he cannot spare, and radios that bring nothing but bad arithmetic. He gives an order that sounds like duty and tastes like defeat. What makes this more than a daring tale is the way it plugs into the larger system. Celian is one hunter among many. She is backed by training that drills men until they can whisper bearing changes in their sleep, and by an industrial base that loads torpedo rooms with reliable steel instead of excuses. She does not need a speech. She needs depth under her keel and a captain who trusts his crew. She has both. Reich sets up again, in case something stupendous has survived. He respects the dark. He also respects math. There is a quality to American victory here that makes hearts lift and throats tighten. We do not just outgun, we out-organize. Radar becomes a sixth sense. Logistics becomes breath. Decisions move down the chain until a petty officer with a headset can ruin an empire's plan by reading the sea right. On Celian's bridge, a junior officer wipes spray from a chart and says, "Recommend course, 270, because instinct and training have merged into something reliable." Reich nods. The boat heels. The men below trust hands they cannot see. The enemy's last weapon under these conditions is luck. Luck fails. Kongo's death sends a shudder through crews who grew up saluting her grey flanks. Urakazi's loss cuts a hole in an escort screen stretched thin. The strait belongs to the hunter. Reich will later wear the title Ace of Aces among submarine skippers with quiet pride and a look that never forgets the men who made the torpedoes run and the boat live through counterattack. Depth charges explode far too close for comfort. Paint dust rains. Lights flicker. The crew bends their knees and their wills and rides the concussions like sailors surf riding. Bridge to the final reckoning with a simple admission. No domain is safe for an enemy who fights Americans in 1944. Day or night. Air or sea. Carrier or submarine. Fast battleship or tin. Can. The hammer we forge doesn't care what shape the nail takes. A battleship vanishes into black water. A destroyer snaps like kindling. A submarine slips away, then writes the story into a patrol report no one can argue with. The ledger is filling. The end is in sight because the sea itself, once a question mark, is a signed American document. A clerk in a quiet compartment opens a ledger and sharpens his pencil. He writes in neat block letters because neatness is respect. He is not a poet. He is the war's memory. He writes what happened while the deck gangs shouted and the guns hammered and men did things that would scare a statue. He writes because numbers, if you read them right, are thunder. The revelation you feel, reading across his page, is that no other nation could have done this in 1944. Not the mass of steel, though, that matters. The mass of system. 738 ships bent to a single purpose in the Philippines campaign. 10 fast carriers in TF-38 moving like four fists with one brain. 6 fast battleships swatting threats and throwing weight like linemen. 40-plus destroyers turning white water into warning lines. Oilers and ammo ships weaving through danger to keep the feast going at sea. The question the enemy hoped would cripple us, how long can you stay in the ring, gets answered by a roar, as long as it takes. The human element is a POW who never expected kindness. He records that he gained weight in American hands, that he tasted vanilla ice cream in a camp where guards called him by name and doctors cared for him because that's what doctors do. He writes home about seeing a baseball game behind a fence and hearing laughter that did not sound like gloating. He expected to be hated. He was instead out-kindnessed. That's a kind of psychological warfare no manual can teach. It says we believe so much in freedom we treat even enemies like future neighbors. The enemy's shock, by the last page, is honest. After Leyte, Japanese commanders admit that Ozawa's carriers were a decoy, a mission of sacrifice, because pilot pools and fuel drums were empty. In Surigao Strait, battleships that had owned night since Tsushima die under American crossfire and radar-directed gunnery. Off Samar, math turns upside down because courage won't permit it to stand. Off Engano, carriers that once wrote history become footnotes in a day. In Formosa Strait, Congo huge, famous, feared sinks to a submarine spread. Every paragraph is a verdict. Holy shit facts line up like men at quarters. Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, Chiyoda, 4 carriers down in one day. Battleships Fuso, and Yamashiro smashed at Surigao. Heavy cruisers shattered off Samar by planes that took off with the wrong bombs but the right ideas. Formosa's air arm, gutted days earlier by combat and precision, never really recovers. Our own blows land at Coast Street. Low gone to a suicide plane. Gambia Bay lost under fire. Johnston, Hole and Samuel B. Roberts blazing until water took them, but the ledger stays lopsided because production, training and logistics refill our ranks faster than an enemy without oil or time can bear. The ledger also records how American values cash out in victory you can touch. Free minds made radar that reads the horizon like Braille. Free managers turned factory tricks into carrier routines. Free crews put humor on the loudspeaker when lies got loud. Free captains gave trust to two 2-year-olds and watched them steer whole task groups with a sentence. Free people sent chocolate and letters and spare parts. That freedom looks like a child's drawing on a locker door and feels like a pilot's gloved hand tapping a rail before he strides to his bird. It is not soft. It is structured. The clerk's pencil writes one last total for this battle. An enemy fleet broken into named pieces. A sea lane opened to an island nation we promised to free. A demonstration that an open society can mobilize faster, fight smarter, and still choose mercy when the guns cool. He closes the ledger and smiles, because the numbers don't merely tell of destruction, they tell of decisions that begat hope. A destroyer escort that fought like a battleship buys a minute that saves 1,000 soldiers ashore. A submarine captain in pajamas proves that giants bleed. A fighter director on his second cup of cold coffee turns a green sweep into survival. The bridge forward is history itself. What we did here becomes doctrine for a world that needs proof that liberty scales. It does. It scaled in steel weight and launch schedules and the simple trust between a talker and a pilot who never met. The last line belongs to an American habit that never gets old. Move toward the problem. Nimitz once joked that the ships, reported sunk, had been salvaged and were retiring in the direction of the enemy. That's the voice I want in your head when you picture the radar's long hand reaching 100 miles into darkness. We didn't retire. We advanced until the ocean itself learned our name.